Hello, David. I'm excited to talk with you today regarding your new book, which is out about a week now, as I understand it. Life Ascending, Unlocking Mental Well-Being Through Timeless Wisdom and New Science. And I know our discussion will probably barely touch the depth of this book, and that's okay because then I want to encourage listeners to read the book for themselves and go a little bit deeper than we were probably able to go today in our discussion. So first off, just tell my listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm a writer and I work in a company called Limitless Research, and really we're involved in the spiritual philosophy. I have a history of being a pastor. I was a pastor for quite a few years. I also traveled around the world, had uh, what we call large crusades in different parts of the world. And then I went through a kind of a spiritual crisis. Even though I was traveling and speaking also many large churches, I went through a spiritual crisis in the first decade of the 2000s. And that led me on a spiritual journey. And I can share a little bit more later on about that, but it led me on a spiritual journey. And where I began to ask the question, Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And I recognized that I wasn't free. There was something missing in my life, and there was a mental unrest. And so I began to ask myself that question: what is the truth that Jesus was speaking of? And one thing you have to, if we all want to be honest with ourselves. That's very, very important. So if you think you know the truth, and if you're an advocate of a certain belief system or whatever, and you claim that to be the truth, but it's not working for me as the one presenting it, well, then you have to start asking the question whether really what you are saying and what you're talking about is the truth, or is it just something that we kind of have adapted because we live in this country, or we come from this kind of a background. We were raised in a Christian home and all of that. So I began the exploration of really looking for freedom, not so much for the truth, but I was looking for freedom because I recognized at the moment that I experienced a deeper level of freedom, I must be touching on the truth that Jesus was referring to if we are to believe Jesus at all. So that was my starting point really for this journey.
Sure, perfect. So what inspired you to write Life Ascending?
Well, it was really to help people. In I've told this story many times. In 2006, during this crisis, even before I prayed for this, that I'm gonna know the truth. I want to know the truth. I had this experience, and I had terrible cluster headaches, and a lot of people don't even necessarily know what cluster headaches are, but according to Google, and I don't know whether you can trust Google or not. That's a different debate. But according to Google, is the worst pain a human can suffer. And I've told this story many times in different settings, and women laugh at me. They say, "Well, you have never been pregnant. You don't know what pain is." And I must admit they're completely correct. But I'm just trying to tell you what Dr. Google says. And so it claims to suggest that it's the worst pain a human can suffer. And it was so bad that I felt like a knife was twisting in my eye, just turning. And it would last from 45 minutes to 3 hours at the time. And then it would reoccur in the beginning only maybe every second day or so, but then it started reoccurring like multiple times a day. And I just said, I want to die. I don't want to live. And during this time, I was dealing with a plethora of anger, and I was angry at certain people who had done me wrong. I was dealing with my own guilt and feelings that I had done wrong. I had this plethora of negative emotions. I was like under a dark cloud, a heavy cloud in my life. And so I really was just seeking some kind of answer. And in the midst of it, I had this inner, I don't know where it came from, to just meditate. Now you have to understand, I'm coming from this very Christian background where meditation was considered an Eastern religious practice that you stay away from as much as possible and want nothing to do with it. But when you're in a serious pain and when you are really suffering, you're willing to try anything, you know. And so I remember when I felt this urge to meditate, I walked down these set of stairs, and I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know the inner stillness or understand any of these different concepts that we talk about in the book. Didn't understand any of that. So when I was walking down this set of stairs, I just sat down in the car and I recreated an image from a movie, The Passion of the Christ, of Jesus. Now, Jesus to me exemplified love, the purity of love, the purity of kindness and compassion. And so as I visualized this, which is not really proper meditation, but to me, that was the best I kind of knew what meditation was. I visualized this. I just saw this image. I was, within a minute, I was overwhelmed with the most incredible sense of love, unconditional love. And I just sat there in my car, slumped over with my eyes closed, and didn't pray, didn't say a word, just sitting, as you know, sitting with God, so to speak. And I just sat there and completely taken in by this image. And within 2 minutes, the pain had disappeared. And I have not had the pain since. Now, that led to all these, life was not perfect after that. I still had the same struggles. I still had the different things, but that was the beginning stage of experiencing something radically different. And through that, I began later on, not right away, but later on, I began to meditate more on a frequent basis and coming to this place of inner stillness, to just becoming still and observing my thoughts, observing becoming aware of consciousness, spirit, or whatever name you want to give it, just becoming aware of my most innermost self, and this loving presence, this peaceful, loving presence. And it began to change how I think, how I process thoughts, how I think about my religious experiences, how I think about every aspect of life literally changed. And because of that, I then, going back to your question, I'm sorry I'm giving you a long answer here, but I started thinking about, well, how can I help people? Because so many people struggle with the chaos of their minds. They struggle with stress. They struggle with anxiety, struggle with guilt. This is a major problem in society, that people struggle, whether you are religious or not religious. How can I somehow or another offer a help to people who are going through challenges and really just live in the prison of their mind and to experience a whole new level of freedom? And so the book was birthed out of that. That's my desire, to really help people experience this deeper level of freedom and inner stillness, because out of that inner stillness arises a deeper sense of love and unconditional love.
Perfect.
I hope that
Perfect. No,
that lengthy answer provides some context to why I wrote the book.
Perfect. No, I think that's very helpful just for the readers to understand that, and a little bit about you and how you got to this point. Thank you. As you were writing this book or doing research for this book, were there any surprising insights or breakthroughs from your perspective as you did some research, things that you discovered that were neat insights or key breakthroughs for you as you researched for your book or even wrote your book?
Well, I think one of there are many, actually. There are many things that happen that kind of deepen my understanding. But one of the things that I realized was that we have put so much emphasis on mental concept, narratives, dogmas. And what I realized was that throughout many different traditions, many spiritual traditions, you can have a fear-based religious belief or fear-based belief, or you can have a spiritual experience that evolves peace and inner transformation. And so I think one of the things that I learned was very helpful in being able to see this, that that first of all, in the beginning, when I had this experience, I thought, well, I'm the only one, I'm going nuts. And, like, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I like having these experiences? But then understanding, oh no, this has been going on for thousands of years, and people from various traditions have had similar experiences, and they've spoken about it and how it changed their lives. So that was an eye opener, because when the more you have a experience of this peaceful love, you just realize that, uh, as the Bible says, Christ is all and in all. God is above all, through all, and in all. You begin to see the sacred in every person, and that was a very meaningful experience for me, to be able to read this, even from science, the point of science and the point of quantum physics, which is always very intriguing to me. All these things, it just spoke of, in many ways, spoke of the same thing, that uh, there is a deeper reality that undergirds all of the three-dimensional world that we live in, and matter and space and time, that there is a deeper level, and life, whatever you want to call it.
No, that makes sense. I mean, it sounds like obviously you had some mystical experiences, and I've had, as I reflect back, I've had at least two, and at the time, I remember, and they were spaced apart, probably a year or so, and I thought, why me? Am I crazy? Should I even tell anybody? Or are they going to think I'm nuts? And I think I actually ended up, I put both of them in my book because I figured I'm going to share them, but I kind of had the same reaction, why me? And then I kind of thought, are these real? Am I really having them? And then I realized I am. And I won't get into what they were, but I hear what you're saying. It sounds like you had a mystical experience, and I've had at least two, and maybe I'll have more. I don't know. And they're neat, and I'm still kind of processing them.
Well, Rich, I think what you're touching on is so incredible, because when you have these experiences, um, in some ways you feel like you're alone. Like in other ways, you feel like you're part of the world. And to have other people, and then learning about other people going through the same thing, is so it is really wonderful. So it's
No,
and that's
it's
probably why we connected here today. So that's good.
That's true. No, they truly were, and mine was very unique and different than yours. So I'm going to read. I pulled three quotes from your book, and maybe I'll just read them and maybe ask you to reflect or elaborate on them. And they're all pretty much related, but I just kind of love them, so I'll read them. First one is, but imagine living with a perception grounded in inner peace, unconditional love, and deep wisdom. The second one is, this is the essence of the ascending life, a state of being where peace and love unlock the gateway to a limitless reality, abundant with wisdom, creativity, and purpose. And I absolutely love that. Because I love the gateway to wisdom, creativity, and purpose, because I'm finding that's so true when I practice my silent prayer. And then the last one, when we return to the beginning, to a place of inner stillness, we glimpse the kingdom of God and step into a realm of infinite wisdom. So I really loved all three. And if you wanted to further elaborate on any one of them, what does this mean, and what happens when we enter this inner stillness?
And thank you for the great questions, by the way. And if I hopefully I can explain this correctly. But all of us know that there is a chaos in our mind. There are voices in our heads. We have these different voices, and I talk a little bit about in the book. We have like a hero voice that makes us look like heroes, and they're all rooted in ego, right? And then you have sometimes a critical voice, or a nagging voice, or a guilty voice. So different voices in our heads that continue to bombard us with information that's based on the past, based on past experiences, based on our childhood experiences. And so if we have traumatic, childhood experiences, these voices continue to echo in our minds. And that leads to so much suffering. That leads to so much turmoil in a person's life. and that we live many times in our head. People often are not even aware. Like I don't know, many times I've been and I've had some mystical experiences. Actually, I remember one time when I just had this sense of union and oneness. I was caught up, like almost like I saw a union. And I remember looking at a woman at a mall when I had this, which was so strange, it was so weird. But I saw this woman and I looked into her, and she was like in her own mind. She was caught up in her own mind. She was not present. And I could see almost like sadness and sorrow on her face. And I realized she was trapped in her own mind with her own thoughts that have been, um, since childhood, have been basically been added to her, and her sense of self had been developed, and now she was living within the confines of the mind. So when it comes to stillness, and when Jesus talks about that it is being born again. What does it mean to be born again? It really literally means to be born from the very beginning. And what is the very beginning? It is a state of it's a state of complete stillness. You had when you were born, you didn't have a history. You didn't have a memory. There was nothing to base it on. You were just aware, and that's it. There was a stillness, and then things were added to you, and you didn't have a concern about the future. If you had a little stomach ache, you were not thinking about, I wonder if this is a worse symptom of something, like what will happen 5 years down the road. You were not worrying about what you were going to do. You were just simply aware. You were present. And when Jesus talks about being born again, he's saying, come to that point of inner stillness, because it's out of inner stillness that you will begin to see and enter the kingdom of God. And when I start looking up that word, kingdom of God, it actually means God's I can. And I go more, I won't bother with all the details here right now, but you can look it up in my book and see some of the explanations I give for that interpretation. It's God's I can. See, most of us live within our own I can. I can do this. I can walk. I can bike. I can drive. I can go to work. But God's I can is a deeper wisdom that comes from within. If we actually experience this loving presence, which I think is a form of union with God, which I'm suggesting in the book is a union with God, that we are one with God at our deepest level, then the wisdom flows from within us. God's I can, and that leads to creativity. That leads to new ideas. That leads to a greater wisdom. And that leads to a unselfish wisdom. See, most of our thoughts and our I can is rooted in our own insecurities. It's rooted in our own fears. It's rooted in ego. It's rooted in our own shadows. But God's I can has no limits. It's limitless. It's not based on how I see and what I can do. It's based on something greater. And that what I think that is what I was trying to communicate with those statements from the book.
No, that's beautiful. I love God's I can. I love that. I love the idea of a deeper wisdom, and it's an unselfish wisdom, because I think of it as we're in sync with God, and we're taking God's actions out into the world is really what you're doing. So I love that God's I can. So I jotted that down. Perhaps a loaded question, but I'll go ahead and ask this. So, what is consciousness?
It's a great question, and one of the things that I have read many books on consciousness, and especially from this scientific point of view. But then, as I began to study this, I also, being my background a pastor, I was Bible college president, so I have theological training. So I wanted to also include that and to take both. So consciousness, very simply, is awareness. And it's an awareness that you are at the very core. It's awareness of who you are. You're alive. So when you lay in a casket, and with your feet sticking out, whatever, sounds a little drastic, but when you lay in the casket and you look at the person living in that casket, there is no life. The body is there, but there is no life. And consciousness is the life, the awareness that is deeper than thought, that is deeper than emotions. It is a very core essence. It's the light. Jesus said, "You are the light of the world." Light illuminates. Light is without light, both from a physical point of view and obviously deeper spiritual point of view. From a physical point of view, there is no reality without light, and the same is true with light, as consciousness is that which illuminates reality. Is that which every experience that I have, whether it is, with my five senses, or with my thoughts, my dreams, everything takes place within my consciousness. So consciousness is that, and to me also it is spirit, and it is your spirit, the very essence of who you are. And it's interesting, one of the things that I kind of talk about in my books, I talk a little bit about light being consciousness, but also the word logos. And if you're familiar with the biblical text where in John's Gospel, chapter 1, where it talks about, I'm trying to remember now, and in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The word here is logos. And I began to look at that word and how even that word to me points to, and I explain it a lot better in the book here because I won't get into all the details now, there's too many things there, but how logos even points to consciousness, and ultimately God being the ultimate consciousness, the I am that I am. So hopefully that gives you some explanation to consciousness.
No, it does. It does. And I think of it as, I guess, when I'm doing my silent sits, and there's different practices. Mine is centering prayer. I think of my little consciousness as sitting with the large consciousness, and we're merging is how I think of it. So no,
listen, how you explain it is so much shorter and briefer, and so much more filled with wisdom than my lengthy answer. So I like it.
No, that's okay. So in today's fast-paced, high-stress world, what are some simple ways people can reconnect with their inner wisdom, as we're discussing it, where it's the God's I can that you just shared with us?
Well, for me, I share what there are many different ways, and obviously to suggest that mine is the ultimate way, that would be foolish. But what I can share, what works for me and
Sure.
what has worked for me. And there are many different things that worked for me. But one of the things I do is every morning is to have a meditation. I sit down and meditate. And essentially what I do is I can share this with you. I take a scriptural verse, that I may know him and the powers of resurrection, the fellowship of his suffering, that I may be conformed unto his death, which is scary, and that I may by any means attain to the resurrection of the dead. Now, I don't go through all of that in a meditation. Well, what I do is I've contemplated, I thought a lot about what that means. So the first step, of course, that I may know him. So I'm saying to know God, to know Christ, is to know I am. I am has no form. We always think of God as some form, but I am in itself is formless. It is that deeper consciousness that we're talking about. So I cannot know, for example, people talk about Jesus. You cannot know Jesus through a form. Nobody's ever seen him. So religion will always try to create these kind of images, but they may be helpful just for practical purposes. But really, you cannot know that. You can know an I am. You can know consciousness. So what you talk about, you get into that place of inner stillness. You can know that I am. So I start with that, and then I move to, because the funny thing is it talks about the resurrection, that I may know him and the resurrection from the dead. And I remember what Jesus said after his resurrection, peace I leave unto you. And then he breathed on them and received the Holy Spirit. Now, breath, spirit, of course, is also breath or consciousness or pure consciousness, Holy Spirit. So I kind of imagine, I visualize receiving this divine breath. And then when I receive that, I receive peace. There's like a peace, not that I receive it, I'm just awakened to it, is probably a better word. I awaken to a peace, and I just sit there and for quite a long time in a state of peace, just in a pure state of peace. Many times I allow peace to, I feel it in my body. I feel it every aspect of me. I let it go through my back, everything in my head, everything. I just focus on peace in every part of my body without, I try to minimize any kind of thought. And whenever I feel a thought coming, and I just kind of revert back to just focusing on peace. So I do that for a while, and I actually forgot. I usually start with gratitude, but let's not confuse things too much here. And then I go to the next point, which is fellowship of his suffering. Now, why do I do that? Because the suffering of Jesus, there are many forms of suffering. First of all, there was a suffering on the cross, and that to me symbolizes love. But the suffering of Jesus was also that when he saw people in need, people who are suffering, people who the children, and he saw the homeless, the naked, the prisoner. He identified with them, and he felt what they felt, and he identified with their suffering. So I sit with that for a while and just allow suffering around me and the suffering of people to become real, so that what happens is essentially and I explain this in the book, their cerebellum, the habit forming part of my brain. I'm essentially reprogramming how I feel, my perception of reality. So I do that with love, and just allow that unconditional love to become more, to rise. Of course, it rises out of inner stillness, but to be more also planted or programmed into my subconscious. And then I go to being conformed unto his death, which to me is not physical death, but it's a death of the ego. Uh, my and what do I mean by ego? My ego is your sense of self based on your physical being, your thoughts, and all these different things. And the ego always seeks to enhance the sense of self. It seeks to distinguish itself from others. It seeks to be different than others. And so, to me, it's dying to that ego, like dying to that sense of self, where I recognize I'm one with God, but I'm also one with everyone because God is in all things. So that is essentially the steps. And then the last part is of course, that Amabania means obtain the resurrection of the dead. In other words, arising into a new person. Like Desjardins said that there is an evolution. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but there's an evolution toward the alpha or toward the omega point in history. So from alpha to omega, the point of omega point in history where Christ is all in and all, when there is a revelation, when we begin to see that, when we are transformed, even our the brain network has been transformed, and where we actually begin to identify and begin to live as an emanation of God in the world. So I gave you a very kind of lengthy explanation, and maybe this is a little difficult for some people to get the first time. I know it was for me to be able to understand this, but I hope it gives you at least an introduction to it.
No, that's helpful. I always like to learn what practices people practice, quite frankly. So that was
Yeah.
very helpful, and it sounds like a beautiful practice that maybe initially sounds complicated, but you probably get used to doing it, and it's becomes very easy for you to sit down and do and go through the different steps, if you will, of your practice.
Well, and I will say this, that I don't recommend that people start there. What I
Okay.
recommend that people start is just being still,
Right.
being grateful and still, and just coming to that point of inner stillness. That's all. Just sit in that. Just sit in that inner stillness. And so I gave you probably, I probably shouldn't have started that with that, but at least it gives you an understanding where I'm trying to take people to through this. And we have meditation programs that help people with this, but the beginning start is always just to come to a place of inner stillness, inner stillness.
Right. That's true. And I forget, you had mentioned something in the beginning when you were sharing about awakening, and it made me think when I thought of my center and prayer practice initially years ago, I used to think of it as I'm being filled with God's love. And then it really dawned on me, I'm not being filled with God's love. I'm awakening to the love that's already in me. I forget what in what context you used it in, but it reminded me of I thought of every time I sat, I'm being filled. And then it dawned on me, no, I'm not. I'm awakening to the love and inner peace and calm and joy that is already in me.
Yeah.
But
It,
it took sitting for quite a while before I was realized that.
well, because you're bringing up a great point, Rich, because our minds are so programmed to see ourselves as separate from God, separate from one another. But on a deeper level, there's oneness, there's union, right?
Right,
I mean, the Bible is filled with that, but also you realize this from quantum physics. It's just there, and so to awaken is really is a perfect word. You wake up to something you haven't seen before, because the mind has been clouded with darkness and you haven't seen it,
right,
and that's exactly what it is, and that's ultimately um, what it's about.
right.
All
And
the other
that,
stuff that I gave you there is a little more to, I shouldn't probably started with that, but it's more on trying to also reprogram your subconscious, reprogram how you see and perceive the world. Because one of the things, and I'm sure you found the same thing with people, sometimes people have these experiences of uh, meditative or sitting with God or centering prayer kind of experiences where they do feel a sense of great peace and love, but nothing changes in their life in the sense of it's an experience, but they're still selfish, they're still self-serving, they're still uh, kind of me against the world, and because it hasn't brought that change. And so we see this quite often, actually. So what I guess what I'm trying to do as well is to help people not just have that experience, but how do we then uh, continue to allow that experience to reshape how we think and how we act in the world, so that we actually truly become an emanation of God in the world.
right. Yeah,
And yeah,
well said. So if listeners take away, one key message from your book, Life Ascending, what do you hope it would be?
great question. It's hard to kind of pinpoint one idea, but I would say that
And if you need to say more than one, I'll take that as well.
but I'm going to try to stick to one. I'll see what happens. I think that mental well-being. Ultimately, I wrote this book to help people with their mental unrest, with anxiety, with stress, with fears, with depression, all these different things. That sure, there are many things that influence that. The way you eat, the way you're whatever. There are many influences. Your exercise and all those things certainly help. But ultimately, it's a spiritual issue. And that when you awaken to this deeper essence of who you are, it's the key to every other aspect of your life. It will help you with your mental well-being. It will then help you to in so many other areas of your life. And so what I want people to know that this is not hard. This is not difficult to in the sense of, okay, well, sounds really complicated and difficult, and I have to go through this steps of meditating on this scriptural verse that I brought before. No, I'm not suggesting that's necessary. What I'm saying is just coming to start with a point of inner stillness. Start there. being grateful for life, go outside in nature and just become very present and allow that to change how you think. Allow that. And if you do that enough, if you just do that, all that you ever do that enough, it eventually will cause you a change. It will change your brain. It will change how you think. So yeah, I hope I didn't contradict what I said earlier, but I think it kind of makes sense when you think more deeply about it. Yeah.
No, that's very, very helpful. Thank you. I was going to ask a couple more questions as we wind it down, and these are really just to help the listeners just learn a little bit more about you. So, what two or three books perhaps that shaped your journey, that or one, two, three books that you can think of that really shaped your journey?
Great question. I'm trying to think here. Some of the books, obviously, on a spiritual level, I'm very grateful for Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth, and that certainly is a tremendous book that I think I read many times. Um, there are other books as well that I have read that are very helpful, such as Heinrich Pay's book on the One, which deals with the quantum physics of oneness, the universal oneness. You said you want three books, or two is enough. I'm trying to think of other books.
Two's plenty. And
Those are
actually,
two books, and I don't know whether it's probably unfair to say that there are many books, so I don't want to necessarily say, well, okay, this book has been a greater help than other books. I honestly don't know. And then, of course, coming from my background, the Bible has shaped a lot of ways that I see things. And although specifically, I think Jesus, the wisdom of Jesus, and specifically if you read it from the Aramaic, from his Semitic background, I think otherwise, the Bible has also distorted spirituality and turned it into a religious experience, which is ultimately is about control and fear. And so it has done a lot of also created a lot of negative things. But overall, I would say if we truly get into the very depth of Jesus and what he communicated, that has definitely shaped me, probably more than anything else.
No, and the Eckhart Tolle book, I remember when I read that book, and I remember that was very helpful for me. That was well before I even began meditating and practicing centering prayer. So I think perhaps his book opened me up to that world, and then from there I began to continue to explore. So I remember that book, and I read it a couple times, and I remember him being interviewed by Oprah. I think they went through the book, I think chapter by chapter, if I remember
Yeah.
right. And I remember listening to the podcast. So no, I remember that book being very eye-opening for me to just realize that who am I, who am I really, and that I'm really the observer of my thoughts.
And you know what? One of the things that I would say too about Eckhart Tolle, you mentioned that his interview with Oprah, there is something very authentic about him, and something very deep and genuine, and that um, it feels like he's real. You know, you and I have probably been around enough to know that there's a lot of noise in the religious world, and sometimes you wonder what is real and what is not real. But whenever I listen to him speak, I feel like he has had a genuine experience. And the same thing with actually another author that I forgot to mention. Another book that had an impact on me was I'm trying to remember now, it's Richard Rohr's book, The Diamond, something about
Immortal Diamond.
Immortal Diamond. Yeah, that was a very significant book for me as well. The same thing with him. There is an attraction to someone who actually exudes this incredible, loving presence and peaceful presence. And I think that's part of why, and even reading the books, you feel that, right? And you feel that same presence. And that to me is, of course, so helpful.
No, I would agree on the Richard Rohr front. I was fortunate back in 2016. A friend of mine, Amos Smith, he had written the afterword for in one of Amos's books, and we met in Albuquerque. We actually met with Richard Rohr for 90 minutes. So he got a meeting with him, and I got to meet Richard. And I remember pulling into the Amos was driving, and we pulled up his driveway right at his house, and he comes walking. There comes Richard Rohr walking out, and it's like two Richards saying hello to each other. But exactly how I would listen to read his books and hear him on podcasts. That's exactly who he was when I met him. He was just a genuine nice
Oh,
person that kind of radiated God. So it was a neat 90-minute experience just to be actually sitting in his backyard talking with him. I was trying not to feel a little bit intimidated, and I just relaxed and enjoyed it, but it was an amazing experience. So
yeah.
what how you hear him on podcasts, that's the same Richard Rohr you get live. So
Well, and that's to me is always a true testament to a person, right? That they are authentic. What they write about, their public self and their personal self is not two different beings.
No, I mean that struck me right away, and I've remembered it to this day. Some 9 years later, that he's very authentic.
Yeah.
And you probably said some of this in your answer about the books and people that have influenced you, but I'll let you add more if there is any more. But who are some mentors that maybe shaped who you are today, and how did they help you, or people that really helped you or influenced you? And they don't have to be they could be through books. I consider even a mentor someone that I've read, and I haven't necessarily been meeting with them, but their books have mentored me.
Great question. And as far as a mentor, a person that this journey that I've been on was, and I will say it. In the beginning, it was quite a lonely journey because nobody understands really what you're going through, what you're talking about. So I didn't tell people, I didn't share with people because it's just, you know what happens when you begin to share some of these things, they will have their judgment. So it's okay, I get it. So actually, a lot of it was just through meditation and being in that place of inner stillness. And then, as I said, trying to come to grips with what was happening and understand really what this incredible uh, inner peace that I felt, loving presence. And I don't mean everything was so perfect and not by any stretch of the imagination. But what I'm suggesting to you, I felt this inner peace. And I started reading a lot of different books to try to understand what was really happening. And really, I was so grateful. So I think there's a lot of different books. I don't know. I mean, you could say that I've never met Eckhart Tolle, and I could say, he was a mentor, or many people could go into that kind of a bracket in my life. But I can't say that it was one person that's in this new chapter of my life. It was more that because it was really, I had some good friends, and I have had some good friends in this part who actually stood with me that I've actually kind of more mentored them, but they've also, as I mentor them and help them, and these are sometimes pastors, these are people from different walks of life. I've helped them, but I also find that when you help someone, they also help you in some ways. They bring clarity, so they are actually, even though you're helping them in the sense of learning about these things about inner stillness and peace and this kind of an experience, you're also receiving from them because you're actually helping them. So I would say that there's lots of people there that have mentored me, but I wouldn't say that I have sat under some person and suddenly they are the ones who have influenced me, because it's not really the case for me.
No, that's okay. Appreciate your honest answer. So, any exciting or any upcoming projects that you're working on, or anything you want to share that what's next for, I know your book just came out, so obviously you want to share your book, but anything you want to share about what you're doing over the next year or so, whether it's related to this book or any upcoming projects.
Well, since I have quite an experience in speaking, of course, I've done that for many, many years and traveled the world and had quite a, I in my previous life, which sounds kind of strange, was quite successful in what I was doing. I do feel that the need to go back and do help people in uh, whatever it is in different settings to experience a deeper level of inner peace and stillness. And totally different from what I used to do before, but we are planning to have seminars, we're planning to do different things even around the world. And I also communicate. My whole goal has been to communicate to a wider audience. I don't want to have it, I don't want to necessarily be in a small narrow audience that's not me. And maybe that's part of my background, things that I did in my life before. But I like to be able to speak to as many people as possible. And then when I speak to you and your background, I might speak a different way. But when I speak to a different audience, I highlight maybe the quantum physics or the psychology and all of that. But really helping people, just not have events that, of course, have teaching, but also have meditation, but also have actual practical. Like I remember uh, I've had events where we spend the morning, I spend several hours teaching and laying the groundwork for everything. And then we have 2 or 3 hours. If we have an all day event, we have 2 or 3 hours where I'm actually inviting people to come with their particular problems and we talk about it. We help people through the process. And that is sometimes the best teacher of all. And because it's really helping everybody to see their own self, and there is a love that happens. I see that when people begin to share their own personal struggles and their own history, and people, you hear some incredible stories, and when people begin to share that, something happens that people feel a greater sense of love and compassion, and then to help that person through whatever they're going through and giving them the tools that they need to really awaken to something that is not coming from me, not coming from the outside, but really is just causing them to awaken. Words are limited. Um, Words can only point to a deeper reality. And so all I'm trying to do is with these seminars is to help people to point to a deeper reality that is already within them and for them to awaken to. So that I guess is really where the next step in our journey, what we're doing.
Perfect. No, that's great. So, is there anything else you want to share that we didn't touch on today? Anything else that I know I asked you some questions?
Well, you
Anything?
have asked such great questions, and you have certainly, I don't know whether I gave good answers, but you have certainly given asked me great questions. And I cannot think of anything that I need to say except that I'm very grateful to you. And I'm thankful for your book, Sitting with God. I think I think it's called Sitting with God. I'm very grateful for that book. And I think that kind of explains in many ways what I'm talking about as well. And so it's a joy for me. This is the first time we have connected, and really, I hope we can connect again, not just through the Zoom, but maybe we can meet in person, at least have lunch sometime. And anyhow, it's been a joy for me to be with you today.
No, I appreciate it. No, if I'm ever on the West Coast in your area, if you're ever in my area, that would be very nice to meet up for whatever breakfast, lunch, dinner, or something along those
Absolutely.
lines. So,
I look forward to that. I'm sure it will happen one of these days.
but no, I want to, thank you so much for your time. I know Life Ascending will help my community, and I'm really excited to share it, our conversation and your book with them. So I'll be putting it up on YouTube. I'll be sharing it to my subscribers, and I'll have links to your book, links to our conversation, and links to your website, so people can learn more about you and find you and do however they want to interact with you. So I just want to thank you for your time today. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.